It could be hairy and awesome at the same time to run a train. I get to control all of this by my own two little hands, and I thought it was awesome.
We wanted to know how professionals have changed over time, so we got 3 different experts from multiple decades to share their experiences.
In the 1980s, it was a total mess because trains were breaking down, tracks were in bad shape. You had so many areas where trains had to go no faster than 10 miles an hour because they were in such terrible shape. Oh God, that was typical. That's actually fairly clean for that era. You sometimes had vandals that thought they would be cute. They would spray paint our windshields, and immediately we'd have to take the train out of service because we couldn't see. Those days, they were dealing with what they called deferred maintenance. Basically, they did just enough to keep everything running. I was supposed to make 3 round trips to Crown Heights. I never left the Bronx the entire day. Only 3 motors in the train were taking power out of 10. But this was a typical consist back in the day. They would run different car classes together, and sometimes the trains would look real funky, but they'd run well together. Ever since the era of David Gunn, they stopped that practice.
In the 90s was a transitional period. In 1988, the MTA hired called Gunn and Kiley, and they came in with a 5-year plan, cleaner trains and advancing the signal system.
Some of the signals dated from the 19-teens.
So it took a little while because they didn't do the whole system at once, but they had to work on sections and built these master towers that would control certain sections. As the 90s and early 2000s, they made the signal system better, and it's still progressing.
In the 2000s, the state of transit, I guess you can say in comparison to the 80s and 90s, it was probably a little bit better as far as, the equipment. A lot of Band-Aids were being put on the equipment. A lot of times you're operating trains with like a bunch of different dead cars and stuff like that. But if you're doing that, you still have to know how to be able to operate it. It's just that it just made it for a more difficult operation. So you just have to alter your operation. For instance, if I have a 10-car consist and 2 of those cars, like say in the back 5 are like just dead, I have to alter my operation in order to make sure that the train is still running as smooth as possible. One of the things that was talked about a lot was the respiratory and hearing. A lot of people that were down there, didn't have hearing protection or didn't think to use it at the time, or it wasn't really encouraged. You go in these crew rooms sometimes and the TV is super loud, everybody's talking super loud, and it's not that they're yelling at you, they just are hard of hearing. And it's because of years of being underground, being on trains, not wearing hearing protection.
My favorite of the old stuff from this era, what was called the R36 World's Fair. That technically is an R33 single, but that was the paint scheme. I just thought they looked awesome. They were like the best looking cars.
When we got this equipment, it was like the Cadillac. They were pretty fast, their braking system.
My favorite equipment was the R62A, all one-hand operation. You get brake with the same hand, the lever is in the middle. The seats are a lot more comfortable.
This is basically everything I ran in the 1980s. This is what a typical, what they call SME train looks like. This is everything from the R10 up to the R68, except for the R44 and R46 like that. And this particular one, it's actually an older IRT SME because of the little, as I call, bumper, because you would bump your knee on it all the time.
This is what they call the master controller. This is what gives the old trains speeds. You got coasting, switching, and multiple. Multiple is the fastest you can go. And then coasting, when the train coasts, they have dynamic braking. So even though you're coasting, at a certain point, the dynamic braking comes in. The train wheels don't stop the train by itself. They come in like when you're down to 15 miles an hour. But other than that, it's the dynamic braking. It's a form of reverse propulsion. So it helps the train slow down. I think they use that on the planes too. This is a brake handle. This is what you see here, right here. That this has to meet with when you're putting it in, because this is gonna clip inside for the emergency. Some guys would cut this off so they could slide it in and move it, but you could get in trouble with that. And at night, if you were going home, you would keep this next to you in case somebody tried to come up on you you're gonna hurt them with this. This is called the dead man's feature. When you push it down and you release this, then you can take off. But if you should get a heart attack or somebody should break into your cab or trying to assault you, you let this go, the train will go into emergency because it has a dead man's feature.
This is an R160. This is also on the B division line. You can only operate with your right hand. And sometimes you would hear some operators complaining about the fact that you can only do that, and for that reason, a lot of them prefer to just do the older lines because then you can at least have two-hand operation. With this, it's all one hand. And it's all the same hand. So think about it, if you have like 30 stops and you're on the local track on the C line, and then you're doing that for 4 times. So you're going down one time south, you're going another time going up north. So that's a lot of wear and tear on just that one arm as opposed to just being able to switch in between. Aside from the size of the cars, the main difference is the lever and where it's actually positioned.
I mean, they basically operated the same way. Every time they would introduce new equipment, we'd have to be trained on the new equipment. I mean, much of it was pretty much common sense. On my last day, there was a new motorman, and they said to me, how many different types of trains did you run in your time? And it came to 15 different car classes. R12, R14, R15, R17, R21, R22, R26, R28, R29, R33, R36, R62, R62A, R142, and a car class that technically doesn't exist anymore, the R142A, which had been redesignated 188.
I remember into the early 90s that you could get a train up to 55 miles an hour. As incidents happened, there's a regulator on the train. So after that, you couldn't get a train up to like 40 miles an hour.
It's definitely a rush. I think part of the rush is like, for me anyway, it was like, I get to do this. And I get to do this on this equipment. You have a sense of freedom. You have a sense of power.
I had the unfortunate thing if somebody knocked on my cab door and said, hey, listen, somebody looks like they're having a heart attack on the train. I get on the radio, ask for police assistance, medical assistance. And you had these people who were like, get this guy off the train, he's making me late for work. And they started kicking the guy who was having a heart attack. I'm like, I don't believe this. I'm like, this guy needs medical attention and you're kicking him? The police came and this guy was like, get him off the train, he's making us late. Bah, 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 bah. And he starts kicking the guy again in front of the police. Now the poor cops have to not only tend to the sick passenger, but now they have an unruly passenger. And the guy copped an attitude and he wound up getting locked up. And that made me sometimes question humanity.
I wasn't a company man. I'm not a rule guy. I grew up in the South Bronx with gangs. I got into fights. And so when I came to work for transit, that was with me already. So my way was more aggressive. You don't have a seat, I'm gonna have to go upside your head. And they were like, what? And I said, you heard what I said. They would back off. I threatened somebody, I'll stab you, man. They called command center. Command center would call me, hey, did you threaten this guy? I said, no, I never threatened the guy.
Oh man, I've had run-ins with unruly passengers. Thankfully, I've never gotten assaulted or anything like that. You pick and choose. You just try to get the unruly passenger either calmed down or off the train as swiftly as possible, not putting yourself in harm's way, and you should never want to put yourself in harm's way. Sometimes you got to kick people off for smoking, fighting. 'Cause I had to kick a dude out for jerking off, and that was like working like the late night. He was just doing a lot, and it was like, yeah, you got to get off the train, bro. For my sake and your sake, please just get off the train.
I think it was like $6.80 an hour, which in that time, 1981, that was big money.
Going into the 90s, you were around maybe $45,000 to $50,000.
In the 2000s, as a train operator, my starting salary was $31, $32 an hour, something like that. And then it increased over time.
And then there's so much overtime that I've heard people make $165,000, $180,000. I never cracked $100,000.
It was kind of hairy. It was kind of hairy. While I was very lucky and was not much of a crime victim, probably because they looked at me and said, we're not going to mess with this guy. He's too big. He's going to kick our ass. But There have been times where, I've dealt with people who've been robbed on the train. They've had a purse snatched on the train. They've been assaulted on the train. It happens, just like it happens in the street.
The crime was real bad in the mid '80s, all the way through the late '80s. In the '90s, there was still crime. Actually, I made one citizen's arrest for a guy that had mugged a lady on the train going to Flatbush. And I said, "You come with me, and if you don't, I'm gonna go upside your head." So he came with me, and he rode with us in the conductor's position till we got to Flatbush. The motorman had called up ahead for police, and they met us, and they arrested the guy. Late '90s, it wasn't as bad as it was in the mid '80s.
In the 2000s, at least in my experience, the crime was a little less than the '80s and the '90s, and I think because of more police presence. But in the 2000s, you heard a lot more, not so much the public, but as a worker, you heard a lot more about violence increasing against station agents, both cleaners who clean the train and who clean the stations, conductors, and train operators. The reason being is because there's a lot more people who are emotionally disturbed that take the train, or people who are just not well, or people who are just, drug abusing or chronically homeless. And sometimes those three things are coupled basically like it's a marriage together, where it's like you have all these different things where it's just kind of like it just exacerbates the situation even more. There are a few I've been to, a few I haven't. I'm not going to tell you where.
I mean, there are rooms that the public doesn't see. Like, for example, you'd have a room maybe where track department is, or maybe the station cleaning crew gets their supplies in.
In the old days, there were secret rooms, like you said, 167th Street to 170 on the D line. On the downtown side, there was a room there that the guy would go in, and he's the tower man for that section of track, because they could throw the switch. They built the master towers. There was no need for that room.
I wouldn't say secret rooms, maybe just rooms that the public doesn't necessarily know about. And I learned that a lot, like through flagging, when construction is being done, rooms underground that you can sit in that are like within the tunnels, areas that you can kind of like pivot and go into if a train is coming, areas where you can like exit out. So some of the actual grates and things that you see like on the sidewalks, those are actual doors to be able to like either go down into the tunnel or to come up out of it.
I mean, they're all over the place, and the riding public doesn't really see them that much. Favorite was the 5. I consider it the best line because it's got a lot of history behind it, because it runs over the only surviving segment of the old New York, Westchester, and Boston Railroad, which went bankrupt in 1937.
I love the 5. Yep, this is the 5 line. A lot of memories on this line. I think I'm working in the suburbs. It's all green. The stations are far apart, they're fast, and it's just like lean back and just cruising on the highway.
To my right, we have the R62A, which is the one of my favorite lines I used to operate a lot. The older equipment is more like a challenge, and I'm a person, I like to challenge myself, and I like the idea of being able to have the amount of control that I do have as I'm operating, as far as like the brake handle, and as far as like the lever to be able to take, 1 point of power or 2 points of power or 3 points of power, which is the highest, depending on, where you're traveling along the route. It's just a nostalgic thing for me as well too, because I used to take the 1 line a lot as a kid.
The 1 was one of those 2 routes I avoided like the plague. And it was because of this bridge. Because every time I got assigned to the 1, somehow they would open up the drawbridge and it wouldn't close. And I'd be stuck on the Manhattan side of the drawbridge. One time it took over an hour and a half for them to close that bridge and lock it properly. Well, when you first start, you're put on what's called the extra list, which means that you could work virtually anywhere around the clock, anywhere. Like I could have to report to, say, 242nd and Broadway at 4:15 in the morning, or I could have to report to, say, Pelham Bay Park at noon. You didn't have a life. They owned you.
When you're new, you're at the mercy of whatever's available. Late mornings, early afternoon, late afternoons, midnights, I did it all. I started at 3:15 in the morning one time, I couldn't do it no more. And when you get time on the job, you can pick any tour, any line.
The first thing that you are is what's called extra extra. You could be literally anywhere at any time on any day. They're gonna put you on every line, and the reason they do that is because they want you to have experience with every line. There were shifts that would start like Friday evening, 6 p.m. in Coney Island, and I lived, at the time, I was on 116th Street and 8th Avenue. So imagine having to take the train, which is about like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, to get all the way to Coney Island, the last stop on the D train, and then, you know, you're working up until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock the next morning, and then having to take the train going back home, which is gonna take like another 2.5 hours because it's construction. The intervals aren't running as swiftly in between because it's late night, so it's not as many trains out. It was definitely a learning experience for sure.
In the wintertime, the jobs have ER in front of their jobs. That means early report. So if you pick a job that starts at 6 a.m. at White Plains and you have an ER, means you got a train to okay in the yard, but there was snow, they take the trains and put them underground near Times Square. So you got to get to Times Square. If you start at 5 a.m., you got to be at 3 a.m. down in Times Square, and you got to get up at 1:30 in the morning to take the train.
Me, I liked a little bit of regularity. Even if I worked different places, if I knew that like every Friday I would be at location A and every Saturday I'd be at location B, that would be fine. I'd have some sort of way of planning my life. So as soon as I was able to, I got off the extra list. The old magnetic tokens. Well, these were developed to combat fare evasion. Unfortunately, any coin of this size would work. In fact, there was a thing for some years when the Connecticut Turnpike, the discount toll coins they would use, which were like worth about 30 cents a piece, would work in our turnstiles, which at the time was 75 cents. So people were getting a bargain, and that's probably why in the 90s they went to the MetroCard.
I think that was part of the Gunn and Kylie again in '88, the money that was coming in to do the turnstiles and do the MetroCard. And the MetroCard was a big thing because they were new. They offered the station agents an extra $2 to handle them in the booth because it had to do with the computer system. They had to program them, so the union negotiated a $2 increase for station agents.
The Omni machines were actually, they were putting them in, and they were fully operational. They just weren't at every station. Stations where there were like a lot of transfer points. So like a station like 34th Street, like 42nd Street, 14th Street, where it's like, all right, well, this is easier as opposed to having to wait to go buy a Metro card from a station agent, which they've slowly but surely taken out the booths. It's so much easier to be able to just take your phone out now, where you don't even need to buy a Metro card. You just take your phone out or your card and you just tap.
Tokens had changed over the years. This one was the first token from 1953, and that's when the fare went from 10 cents to 15 cents. That's when they started with tokens. And then this one was when the fare went from 20 to 30 cents. They made the larger token. And then this one is when the fare went from 35 to 50 cents. And like I said, this one was one of the last ones issued, which was magnetic, to supposedly thwart fare evaders. And it didn't work as designed, though. Fare evasion has been going on probably before I even hired on, and probably will go on long after both of us are with God.
So it's always been a problem. I think nothing's changed. Social media has changed. It's getting more news because everybody's got a camera, everybody's filming. It was a thing when I was a kid. I jumped that turnstile and I snuck under or over.
In the 2000s, they were absolutely fare evaders. Absolutely. I don't think that's ever gonna stop. And I think as time goes on, people who just don't want to pay are gonna find ways to just not pay. Whether it's just hopping or ducking. Some people used to like walk in behind somebody or walk like, this is one person, this is another person, like walking in together to just get into the turnstile together.
Some of them were very comical. These two people were like trying to get in on one fare and they were like butting each other as if they were having sex. And the station agent calls out, "Oh, they're so cute." In 1983, we had these monstrosities that weighed about 30 pounds. It was like almost like carrying like a gym bag. That's how big they were. But they weighed more than a gym bag.
In the 90s, the motorman, train operator, had a radio. We'd have to sign out for it and return it, and we put it in a bracket in the train cab. And we used to carry that around and was lugging that around. Conductors didn't have a radio. So when you wanted to communicate, you had a problem in your situation, you'd have to go up front to the train operator and let them know, need to call command center because we have a problem. In the mid to later part of the 90s, I can't pinpoint the exact time they started issuing portable radios, which was great.
They did work. I won't say they did, but the problem was in the system, there were what were called dead spots. I don't know if, since I retired, if they fixed some of them. They fixed a few.
There are still very much dead zones within the system. I'm not exactly sure the reason for that being. Like, I have a couple of theories as to why that's the case. But that's super important because you need to be able to communicate with the people who are out there on the front lines and vice versa. And when you can't communicate or the communication is lacking, that can be a problem, especially if there's an incident taking place. They may be trying to reach you for a route change or to tell you stay in the station or stay delayed outside the station because something's going on. It can be a number of different things happening, and you may not be privy to it because you just can't hear them and or you can't respond to them.
Let's put it this way. I miss the clowns. I don't miss the circus. I mean, did I have fun doing it? Yeah, I enjoyed doing what I did. I took the job seriously, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I enjoyed doing what I did.
And it was the happiest thing I ever did. I love operating trains. I got a joy out of it. So I tell people, I love going down Lexington Avenue Express or the A line. I've seen the Williamsburg Bridge on the AMs and on the PMs. There've been some crazy stuff. I ate a seagull one time coming on the A line over the bridge, but I loved the job. I loved it.
There were things about it that I liked very much and loved as well, and there was some things about it that I didn't like so much. But one thing that I liked about being a train operator was I just took pride in being efficient. Another thing that I enjoyed about it was the seclusion because you're in a cab by yourself. It's a difference with being a conductor. You're both in the cabs, your respective cabs by yourselves, but you're not interacting with the public as much. With me being a musician, there were sometimes I had moments where I was like, coming up with just different music as I was operating and just singing to myself or rapping or just, whatever it was. Like, it's just like, as you're operating, that's also, of course, you're paying attention to what you're doing, but the level of seclusion gives you time to recollect things or, clear your mind about some stuff or just be creative. And, I tried to do that as much as possible when I was operating.